The moment Claire Whitmore told me to stop being so perfect, her voice broke like something inside her had finally shattered. We were standing beneath the white awning of the Community Arts Center on a bright Saturday afternoon, surrounded by laughing families, painted banners, and tables covered in donated food, yet the look in her eyes made the whole crowded courtyard feel suddenly empty. I had just offered to carry another box for her, just apologized for something that was not my fault, just smiled the calm, careful smile I had spent years perfecting. Claire stared at me as though that smile had wounded her. Then she said she could not stand it anymore. I turned to leave before she could see how deeply her words had cut me, but before I took a second step, her fingers closed tightly around my hand. Before I tell you why she stopped me, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. Stories like this remind our community that sometimes the people who appear strongest are carrying the heaviest invisible burdens, and sometimes one honest moment can change two lives forever. My name is Graham Mercer, and for most of my 34 years, people had described me with the same harmless words. Reliable. Patient. Thoughtful. Easygoing. The kind of man who remembered birthdays, arrived early, replaced the office coffee before anyone noticed it was empty, and apologized when strangers bumped into him. At the architectural firm where I worked, I was the person everyone called when a deadline collapsed or a client became difficult. At family gatherings, I was the son who never argued, the brother who never complained, the uncle who always brought the right gifts. People trusted me because I never made them uncomfortable with my anger, my sadness, or my needs. What none of them understood was that my calmness had not grown from peace. It had grown from fear. My mother had spent most of my childhood trying to keep our home from falling apart. My father was not cruel every day, which somehow made his cruelty harder to predict. Some mornings he would cook pancakes and play old records while sunlight filled the kitchen. Other mornings, one misplaced bill or an unanswered question could turn his face hard and his voice sharp. I learned early that a perfect child could soften a dangerous room. I kept my schoolbooks neat, my shoes lined against the wall, my grades high, and my emotions hidden. When my father finally left when I was 16, my mother hugged me and said she did not know what she would have done without her strong boy. She meant it as love. I received it as an assignment. By the time I met Claire, perfection was no longer something I performed. It was the only language I knew. She entered my life 18 months before that afternoon at the Arts Center, when our firm was hired to redesign an abandoned train depot into a public library and youth studio. Claire worked for the nonprofit leading the project. She was 29, stubborn, quick-witted, and impossible to impress with polished presentations. She wore her reddish-brown hair in a loose knot that was always falling apart, kept pencils tucked behind both ears, and spoke about neglected neighborhoods as if every boarded window were a personal promise she intended to keep. During our first meeting, the conference room projector failed. While everyone else waited for technical support, I began describing the designs from memory. Claire interrupted me and spread the printed plans across the floor. She sat cross-legged beside them and asked questions no one else had considered. Where would a nervous teenager go if the main room felt overwhelming? Could the windows be lowered so children in wheelchairs could see the garden? Would the building still feel welcoming to someone who could not afford a coffee or a membership? I had designed hundreds of elegant spaces, but Claire made me think about whether those spaces understood the people entering them. We began spending long daytime hours together at the depot, measuring cracked walls and tracing old plumbing beneath the dusty floors. Claire never treated me like the flawless professional everyone else saw. She teased me for ironing my work shirts too carefully and called me suspicious whenever I claimed not to have a preference about lunch. She noticed that I always gave her the better chair, the last bottle of water, the cleaner pair of safety gloves. At first, she seemed amused. Then she began watching me with a quiet concern that made me feel exposed. Our friendship deepened slowly. I learned that Claire had grown up in foster homes after losing her mother in a highway accident. She had built her life through scholarships, temporary jobs, and the fierce belief that useful work could create the security she had never received. She hated pity and disliked promises because too many adults had made them carelessly. Yet beneath her sharpness was a tenderness she tried almost as hard to hide as I hid my pain. She remembered the names of every teenager who visited the future library. She kept granola bars in her bag for children who arrived hungry. She pretended not to cry when an elderly man donated a box of books that had belonged to his late wife. That I fell in love with her before I admitted it to myself. It happened in ordinary moments. The way she stood in a beam of afternoon sunlight, dust floating around her as she argued for preserving the depot's original brick. The way she grew quiet whenever someone spoke kindly about her work. The way she looked at me when she thought I was not paying attention, as if she were trying to solve a problem that frightened her. I never told her. Wanting something from another person felt dangerous, so I became more helpful instead. I fixed her broken bicycle, revised Gantt diagrams on weekends, and brought coffee exactly the way she liked it. I gave her everything except the truth. Claire began pulling away 3 months before the community fundraiser. She answered my messages politely but briefly. She stopped inviting me to walk through the farmer's market after our Saturday site visits. When we worked together, she kept our conversations focused on schedules and budgets. I assumed I had misread our closeness and decided to make the retreat easier for her. I became even more courteous, even less demanding. When she canceled lunch, I told her it was completely fine. When she forgot an important document, I accepted the blame in front of the board. When she snapped at me during a meeting, I brought her tea afterward. The more carefully I erased my disappointment, the angrier she seemed to become. The fundraiser was supposed to celebrate the final phase of construction. The courtyard outside the arts center was filled with local musicians, children painting small wooden tiles, and volunteers selling baked goods beneath the summer sun. Claire had been moving from table to table since morning, solving problems faster than they could appear. I arrived early, of course. I repaired a loose banner, found an extension cable for the band, and drove across town to replace a missing permit that someone else had forgotten. Around noon, Claire discovered that rain from the previous week had damaged several boxes of donated art supplies stored in an outdoor shed. She stood staring at the ruined paper, her face pale with exhaustion. I told her I would replace everything myself. I said she should not worry. I said I would handle it. That was when she looked at me as though I had said something unbearable. She asked why I always did that. I told her it was only a few boxes. She said it was never only a few boxes. She reminded me of the meeting where I had taken responsibility for her mistake, the bicycle repair I had completed without letting her pay, the lunches I pretended not to mind missing. I tried to calm her because people nearby were beginning to notice. That only made her eyes fill with tears. Then she told me to stop being so perfect. The word struck harder than any insult could have. Perfection was the only gift I had ever believed made me worth keeping. Hearing her reject it felt like hearing her reject all of me. I gave her the careful smile I used when I was hurt and said I understood. I did not understand at all. I turned toward the parking lot, determined to leave without making a scene. Her hand caught mine. Claire held on with both strength and desperation. The noise of the fundraiser continued around us, but she seemed to forget everyone else. She told me she was not asking me to leave. She was asking me to stay as a real person. She said she could not keep standing beside a man who offered kindness like a shield and apologies like locked doors. She said she had spent months trying to get close to me, but every time she reached for something honest, I gave her another favor instead. That I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that helping people was simply who I was. But my chest had begun to ache with the effort of holding everything inside. Claire's fingers trembled around mine, and for the first time I realized she was not angry because she disliked me. She was angry because she cared and had no idea how to reach me. She confessed that she had begun avoiding me because being near me made her feel selfish. She had feelings for me, but she did not know whether I wanted her or merely wanted to take care of everyone. She feared that if we became something more, would quietly sacrifice every preference, every frustration, and every dream until one day I would resent her without ever allowing her to know why. She had watched foster parents smile politely while counting the days until she left their homes. She could not survive another relationship built on hidden feelings and unspoken departures. Her honesty stripped away every defense I had that I told her the truth in fragments because I did not know how to release it all at once. I told her I hated black coffee but had been drinking it at work for 6 years because the office order was easier that way. I told her I had wanted to attend a design conference in Copenhagen but gave up my place when a colleague asked for the same week off. I admitted that I had been angry when she cancelled our lunch, hurt when she stopped calling, and terrified every time she seemed distant. The words felt ugly and selfish as they left me, but Claire did not let go. Then I told her about my father. I explained how carefully I had once listened for his footsteps, how quickly I learned to become useful, how deeply I believed love depended on keeping everyone calm. I admitted that I did not know how to ask someone to stay because part of me still believed the request itself might drive them away. By the time I finished, my face was wet. I could not remember the last time I had cried in front of another person. Perhaps I never had. Claire stepped closer and pressed her forehead against my shoulder. She did not praise me for being strong. She did not promise she would never leave. She simply told me that my needs were not emergencies and my emotions were not burdens. She said she did not want a perfect man. She wanted Graham, including the parts of him that became irritated, uncertain, frightened, and tired. That afternoon did not magically heal everything. Real change rarely arrives as cleanly as it does in speeches. Our first attempt at dating was awkward. I still apologized too often. Claire sometimes mistook my quietness for withdrawal. She pushed too hard when she was afraid, and I agreed too quickly when I wanted time to think. Yet we began practicing honesty in small, uncomfortable ways. That I told her when I disliked a restaurant instead of claiming every menu looked good. She admitted when she needed reassurance rather than pretending she needed space. When she asked me to help organize a donor event, I said I was exhausted and could give her 2 hours, not the entire day. She stared at me for a second, then smiled so proudly that I almost laughed. When she became overwhelmed by the library opening, she asked me to sit beside her without fixing anything. We spent 20 quiet minutes on the depot steps in full afternoon sunlight, doing nothing except letting each other be tired. The most unexpected turning point came several months later when my mother visited the completed library. She walked slowly through the reading rooms, touching the shelves and admiring the restored brickwork. When she saw a photograph of Claire and me hanging near the donor wall, she smiled and called me her dependable boy. For once, the familiar praise did not make me proud. It made me sad that we sat together in the garden courtyard, where children were painting at low tables beneath young maple trees. I told her I had spent most of my life believing I was responsible for her happiness. Her face changed immediately. She tried to deny it, but I gently reminded her of the words she had spoken after my father left. She began to cry. She said she had been frightened and lonely, and she had leaned on me because she did not know how else to survive. She apologized for turning my strength into a duty. Forgiving her did not mean pretending the damage had never happened. It meant seeing that she, too, had been surviving with the tools she had. I took her hand and told her I loved her, but I could no longer be the wall holding everyone upright. She nodded through her tears and said perhaps it was time we both learned to stand without making someone else responsible for keeping us safe. A year after the fundraiser, Claire and I returned to the art center on another bright Saturday afternoon. The library had become more successful than either of us imagined. Teenagers filled the recording studio, toddlers crowded the reading circle, and retired volunteers taught painting classes in rooms that had once been abandoned. Near the entrance stood a wooden bench made from salvaged depot beams. Claire had arranged for a small brass plaque to be attached to it. The plaque did not carry either of our names. It read, "You do not have to be perfect to belong here." I stood staring at those words while Claire watched me with tears shining in her eyes. She reached for my hand exactly as she had on the day everything changed, but this time her grip was gentle. I did not feel trapped, rescued, or obligated. I simply felt known. I told her I loved the plaque. Then, because I had finally learned that love could survive honesty, I added that the lettering was slightly crooked. Claire laughed so loudly that several people turned toward us. I laughed too, and the sound felt freer than anything I had ever built. Before we left, we sat on the bench while sunlight moved across the courtyard. Claire rested her head against my shoulder and asked what I wanted next. In the past, I would have searched her face for the correct answer. Instead, I told her I wanted a home with large windows, a messy kitchen, and enough courage between us to have difficult conversations without fearing the end. I told her I wanted to marry her one day, but only if we continued choosing each other honestly rather than perfectly. She cried before I finished. Then she told me that was the first proposal she had ever trusted, even without a ring, because it did not promise a flawless life. It promised a truthful one. Please leave a meaningful comment about the person in your life who made you feel that you did not have to be perfect to deserve love. Sometimes sharing that lesson may help someone else release a burden they have carried silently for years. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Claire once believed my perfection was keeping us apart, and she was right. The hand she grabbed that afternoon did more than stop me from walking away. It stopped me from disappearing inside the person everyone expected me to be. In learning to disappoint others occasionally, I finally stopped disappointing myself. In allowing Claire to see my wounds, I discovered they did not make me harder to love. They made love possible. And beneath the bright windows of the library we had built together, surrounded by imperfect walls carefully restored instead of replaced, I finally understood that the strongest relationships are not created by two flawless people. They are created by two honest people who keep reaching for each other, especially when walking away would be easier.